Well, today we also have a couple of real-life influencers, and it's time to meet the first one. We have Darryl Cheng, and he's the author of The New Plant Parent and the creator of the Houseplant Journal. So if you're not already following it, let's get a few more followers for you today on here. He already has hundreds of thousands, so he might not notice. But Darryl's passion for plants and engineering approach to plant care have turned him into one of the most trusted houseplant resources on the internet. What was initially a hobby Tumblr page has turned into an Instagram account with over 500,000 followers, a go-to website for anything houseplant related. His very own houseplant care book and plant time-lapse videos have gone viral around the world. Well, it's very exciting to have you with us, Darryl. Thank you for coming all the way over from Canada to us, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you all so much for having me. I'm just really excited to be here. And actually, before I even dive into the presentation, I think when we use the word influencers, we sort of think, oh, it's this new thing that seems like kind of foreign and weird. But it's very similar to the music industry, where we all like different artists, and there's no one artist that's necessarily the best one. So it's really about who has the attention, and having multitude of influencers, as we're going to hear from other ones today, that is the strength of the influencer marketing. And so now that we have this ability to speak to people about plants through influencers, I think that's a really exciting time. Well, once again, my name is Darryl Cheng, and I created what's called the Houseplant Journal. That's just my Instagram and website. And I'm also the author of The New Plant Parent. And today we'll discuss why people listen to me. Yes, captivating videos, time-lapse videos, as Tim mentioned, but also that I approach houseplant care in a different way. Also mentioned that my background is engineering. If any of you know what this iron ring means, that's my sort of approach to how I talk about houseplant care. And lastly, we'll just have a short discussion about working with people like me. And I'm hoping also that during the Q&A, then, in a sense, here there's a live influencer from the wild standing in front of you, so I'd be happy to answer any questions as best as I possibly can. So anyway, how did I start Houseplant Journal? Well, like many millennials, I was still living at home with my parents, and my mom said to me, hey Darryl, let's decorate the house with some houseplants. They seem pretty trendy. And so I said, okay, sure. But then she added, but you need to figure out how to take care of them because I'm bad with plants. And this was confusing to me because my mom taught me how to do outdoor gardening. We had vegetables, annuals, perennials. Our garden seemed pretty nice, so I was wondering what's so different about indoor plants. But she kept going back to this narrative, oh, I kill everything, it's always overwatered, that kind of narrative. So I did like any good millennial would, and I bought the plants and I just tried to Google the information. And so here you can see what the plant shelf looked like during the nighttime when I set it up. Doesn't look all that attractive, but when it's lit from the skylight that's above it, then the natural light has much better photographic properties. And this is where I began Houseplant Journal, realizing that I have some excellent light here. It's almost like a softbox. And so my plants photographed very well. And I don't remember, I don't know if any of you remember that slide where you saw all the different platforms and which ones took over in different times. But if you notice, there was one called Tumblr. That's what I used at first. So I used Tumblr to just journal about my houseplants. It was literally just to document. But eventually, when I moved to Instagram, I also started making what's called time-lapse videos. And that's essentially staring at the plant with a camera for sometimes weeks or months at a time in order to watch it grow. So here I'm going to share with you one. Some of you, if you ever owned a sensitive area, and you see that new shoot coming out, well, it seems to take a long time. So time-lapse is something that I think will be very interesting to watch here. every flicker is one day going by. So by the end of this video, you would have watched about 3 months going by watching this snake plant grow. And it's just really, fascinating because we can't really perceive this kind of plant motion, so to speak. And that's the end of it, yeah. And one more here, which is of a very popular plant, the Monstera Thai constellation. We're always very excited when we see that new little leaf spike coming out, and so I wanted to capture it on video. Now, I guess the strength with time-lapse is because as humans, we experience our moments like in seconds and minutes, but plants, we could say, experience their moments over days and weeks. So the time-lapse video compresses all of those things together into something that we can watch and actually perceive. So yes, here's the leaf unfurling, opening up. And I basically took over one of my showers and put the plant in there. My wife is like, I guess no guests can come over to the house now because you have a plant in the shower. And surprisingly, as I come to learn that because it's just vegetative growth, I can keep the light on 24/7 so that the lighting is consistent for the time lapse. Oh, there we go, yeah. I always pat the plant because they do a great job when they grow. So, I mean, I think the time-lapse videos, yes, you could see that the idea of them going viral, of course, was not my plan. I was just sharing something that I found was interesting. But I mean, I have to definitely give, say that I'm very blessed to say that, external media was very eager to pick this up. So I've been on, some news things. I've been in Better Homes and Gardens magazine, and also some Facebook. This Now This is a very big news aggregator, and they made a nice compilation of my videos, which those were probably the ones that went viral. You probably can't see it, but there's 11 million views under under there. So yes, these are what I would consider big breaks and really contributing to how my account grew. But the other thing that made the account grow was the way that I talk about how to take care of plants. And if I see influencers as being analogous to musical artists, well then, for the next little bit in the presentation, here I'm going to do my usual song and dance. So, the usual tips and tricks that I hear people talk about on social media and through receiving thousands of plant questions is we have a sort of separation of people say what to do, like tips and tricks, then there's how they are interpreted, and finally it speaks to an underlying belief that they have about houseplant care. So the usual things, don't overwater, bright and direct light. I'm sure that you've probably, maybe in passing, even shared some of these sorts of things. But through what I've come to see when I read thousands and thousands of questions that I get, is that people believe if the plant is not perfect, then there must be something wrong, and if the plant just doesn't look as nice as when they first bought it, they label themselves a plant killer. And so then here, the underlying belief we could say is people think proper care, whatever that means, should equal perfect plants forever. But for myself, I've grown my staghorn fern here for a number of years, and it has definitely grown and changed, and I've been very satisfied with it. And I've sort of realized that I'm not really following this kind of tips and tricks in order to have this kind of success. So I've come to develop like a new approach to houseplant care, just to contrast this to what people used to think, well, here's a piece of decor and here's how you maintain it. And a lot of the marketing and narrative has been geared around this, right? We always talk about, oh, it has to be easy. Oh, it does great in low light. So I always find that these things tend to cause people to be more worried when they buy a plant. But my approach to houseplant care is threefold. You have to first understand your physical environment, mostly light, temperature, humidity. Next is be realistic about how much you can spend time caring for the plant. This is your effort. And lastly is let nature take its course. And in order to make this all nice, 3 E's, I call this last piece about expectations, meaning not to expect your plant to look exactly like the day you bought it. And this is a more holistic approach is more rewarding. And so, for example, like that same Thai constellation, we see this yellow leaf, and you might wonder, well, what's wrong with the plant? And if we take a sort of very narrow approach, we would just immediately look at it and try and diagnose, oh, maybe it's overwatering, maybe it's less like under fertilizing. But if we take a long-term approach, then you can see when the day I bought the plant, it was a very small seedling, and a year later it started growing some leaves, and 3 years later, that's what the plant looks like 3 years after. And if you look at, I'm going to try not to block it here, but the yellow leaf at the bottom of the 3-year plant was the first leaf in the first year when I owned the plant. And that is to sort of realize that losing older leaves is just how plants grow. And so but the problem is if we try and look at it in a sort of narrow view to diagnose it, then we'll always be worried because, as I tried to mention, this turnover always happens. So yeah, year 4, that's what it looks like now. So I try to tell people, okay, the first thing is leaves have a limited lifespan. And so the goal of owning a houseplant in the long term is that your new growth on average will outpace the dying of the older leaves. And seems obvious, but of course that means the plant will change. And I think when I try and impress this upon people, it seems obvious at first, but if they don't ever hear it, then they just go back to the usual tips where they say, if yellow leaves equals overwatering, then they'll always believe that there's this, something wrong. And inevitably, there's going to be the same kind of narrative. And I always like looking at memes and comics because it really is almost like taking a litmus test of how do people feel about any particular topic, houseplants in particular. Another one here is like people see on Instagram all their plants in sort of one particular moment, but then of course it's not quite as good. And here another one, a perfect example of buying a lovely fiddle-leaf fig, and eventually it just loses all its foliage. Well, I'm going to say that the most impactful change that anybody can make for their plants is to understand how light behaves indoors, which is why I call light being the most important but the least understood. And so this next part of the presentation is actually part of a bigger presentation that I give about plant care in general. But like the key to success with houseplants, as I mentioned, is light. But I'm not just going to say that therefore you blast it with sun, but rather to understand how it all works together. And that is to say, light dictates the growth potential of the plant, but then care and watering, fertilizing, and all these other things, they realize the potential of that plant. Which is to say, when we describe light, saying bright indirect light, it's really just too vague and doesn't really convey that importance. And the reason why I know it doesn't convey the importance is because I get pictures like this when people say, "What's wrong with my plant?" And I ask them, "Show me where you put the plant," and they are, miles away from windows. So at first, I tried to be very technical and develop a way to measure light and all these things. But I understand that not everybody will want to engage with light in such a technical manner, but I'm going to do it here just for your benefit. But that is to say that because I've gone in such detail with the light, then I can develop a more simple guideline that actually works and lines up with the empirical evidence. Okay, so what is this empirical evidence that I found? It's not a scientific study, it's really just a very small experiment that I did at home. I had 2 what are called quantum sensors. Maybe some of you have these in your nursery. And they measure light, and not only that, but they record the light reading over a period of time. And so I have 2 of these things, and I place them on my shelf roughly 2 feet apart. And so that was light intensity data collection. But I also combined this with shading analysis. And if any of you are in architecture, shading analysis is something where from any particular spot inside an indoor space, you kind of analyze the dome that surrounds that spot. And if I going to see if I can do this with this control here. Yeah, so when you move closer and farther from the window, it changes your angle of view of the sky and also the path of the sun that is comprised inside that visible part. So this is what I use, what's called a fisheye lens, to take a picture of like a dome view of the sky from that particular spot on my shelf. And the results are, over a 2-week period, I got this sort of pattern. Now, of course, because of weather changes every day, so that's why this graph is not very clean, but we can at least try and make sense of it and say, okay, well, why is there a big spike at between 9 and 10 a.m.? Well, because if we look at the shading analysis, between 9 and 10 is when the sun is in our field of view. But then the rest of the day, when the sun moves elsewhere, we get all these other squiggly lines, so-called indirect light. So what about that other sensor that was farther away? I did it purposely to have at the exact same time to negate the effect of the weather. And I mean, we know intuitively it's going to be less, but as an engineer, I want to know exactly how much less. This is how much less, and I'm going to toggle back and forth. Okay, good, I can do it. Just to have you appreciate, just on a quick glance, how different it is, only 2 feet farther from the window. And just looking at the shading analysis, we can look at, okay, what happened to that spike at 9 and 10? Well, that's because the sun doesn't actually pass onto that part of the shelf. But the surprising thing is the rest of the day, the so-called indirect light, is quite a lot less than what it is when you're just 2 feet closer to the window. So, because I'm in a room full of potentially horticulturalists, tell me, what does the area under the curve represent, PPFD versus time? Daily light integral? Anyway, the area under these curves, sorry to bring calculus into this, but I want to know exactly how much less. And so the daily light integral, when I'm this close to the window, was 1.48 moles per day. And when I am farther from the window, it's 0.25, which is a ratio of 5.9, almost 6 times less. So meaning we know it's less, but maybe we wouldn't be able to perceive that it is 6 times less. And I'm only 2 feet farther from the window. And just to be complete, I did this experiment a few other times with my friend here at a loft. He's got a huge window facing west. What does his light look like? We know it's more, but I want to know exactly how much more. He's got this. And cutting off the graph at the same part as before, that's what I'm getting for his 2-week period of measuring. His DLI is 13.9, and I am just a measly 1.48. And just to round off the experiment, doing this at a nursery, again, we know it's more, but what do plants at a nursery get? And for this particular time, also very high, but in terms of numbers, for this particular time, he was getting 8.6 moles per day, and again, to remind you, my window is just 1.48. So I think one of the key reasons why we have invented this idea of a green thumb is perhaps because we just haven't really been able to account for the different sizes of people's windows. So when you look on Instagram, other people's plants look better than yours. It's not because they have a green thumb. It's perhaps because they just have huge unobstructed windows. The difference is significant, and unfortunately, we can't really feel this with our eyes. So that simple guideline that I promised here is, if the plant wants bright indirect light, then you consider the entire surroundings of the plant, and you say to the person, you put the plant as close to the window as possible. That's the first step. And the second thing, which is a sort of, if the sun shines on the plant for a duration longer than 2 or 3 hours, then maybe you should block it with a curtain. It's not the moment the sun shines on it that you have to move it away, because we saw that when you move the plant from the window, that indirect portion gets really dim. Yeah, so it does not mean that just anywhere in the room is fine. You put it as close to the window to get the best possible. Don't avoid direct sun entirely, just avoid prolonged exposure. And also the last point is that people, when we say bright indirect light, then people might think everybody has the same, but really in reality, it's the size of the window and where the person puts it can have a really big impact on the light, and that you can't really feel this. So maybe you're probably thinking, well, then where did this idea of thrives in low light come from? And I think this is a miscommunication between horticulturalists and interior designers, because horticulturalists, when they say thrives in low light, they're saying that this plant can grow well under the forest canopy, which is not blocked by walls and ceilings. But an interior designer, when they say thrives in low light, just means that this plant dies slower and less noticeably than other plants. And just to round it off with the shading analysis, the idea is when you're covered by opaque walls and ceiling, the indoor space is really nothing like a forest. I would really call the indoor space more like a cave. Yeah, so just the way that plants work is that they need to have that indirect light to be as close to the window as possible, and everything else that you do will be to support that. So speaking of work, I just wanted to finish off here with a few slides about working with influencers, and to bring to your attention the analogy between traditional media and our current landscape. So in traditional media, obviously we're talking about print, radio, and television, and that usually you would have to pay to put yourself in front of those audiences. But in social media, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and whatever else might come in the future, that exposure is more organic, because each individual person can just start an account and start saying things in front of the camera or posting pictures, as I once did. So you could also then pay to be in front of those established audiences. And really, we had the table is slightly in the way. Anyway, the currency that we're really dealing with, as was mentioned in the first presentation, is people's attention. And so how can we work with influencers? Well, within the social media landscape, we have several things. Interviews and podcasts, I think, are one of the best ways to engage with influencers, because, let's be honest, people love talking about themselves. So they'll willingly do this for free. Affiliate links, which maybe growers that are not going direct to consumer may not benefit so much, but retailers, what are affiliate links? Are people like me, influencers, can post, oh, I have this plant and here's the link to buy it. That link contains a special tag that tells the seller that it came from me, and then they pay me a small amount from it. And then that gives me an incentive to talk about different products that I use. And hopefully, of course, that I already use, so it's not something that you're just selling to. And lastly is sponsored posts and stories. This is sort of like that spokesperson thing, which is that, yeah, you can engage with social influencers as spokespeople for specific things. But beyond social media, you can run events, such as this, but on a scale of being, let's say, in a nursery, if you have a space, you can sort of effectively rent it out to smaller sellers of various plants and other plant-related things. And it's really a kind of community building experience. I did one of these a few weekends ago. It was very small, a very, very fun time to meet people in person. You can host guest workshops, or you can do speaking engagements, or for me, sometimes I do book signings. And these are all things that I think are useful ways to engage with influencers such as myself. So just to kind of finish off here, I'm the author of The New Plant Parent, and my book has been translated several times into different languages: German, Chinese, and Korean. I think there's a Russian one coming out soon. Anyway, so I'm just really thankful that I have this opportunity to speak to you all, and I'm ready to take any questions.
Well, thanks very much, Darryl. That was really interesting, because it gets a bit under the skin of the sort of your interest. It's something that's come from your personal interest, which is quite specific, on especially on the whole engineering aspects, the lighting part, sharing that and building up a following to help people be successful with their plants, which is really, really valuable. And just to ask maybe a more personal question, is this how you make a living to do this?
Now it is.
Now it is, yeah.
So prior to my book coming out, I was working in a software design firm, and oddly enough, the day my book came out, the next day I went into work and my whole team got laid off. All 20 people got laid off. And so I was like, if this is not a sign that I should try this, I don't know what is. And so yes, I have been doing this, and it is a way of, entrepreneurship, I think is definitely something that I have to do too, and that, let's call it income streams come from all different places, and you have to be creative and adaptable.
Yeah, and how have you worked specifically with a grower, whether it's Costa Farms or whoever? Give an example of how it's worked for you.
Well, it's really interesting that for me, without any external influence, let's say, I have a plant, I bought it, it grows pretty nicely, and then I just talk about it in a very natural way. Well, it's almost like a perfect opportunity for whoever is selling that plant to then now maybe put some money behind that and craft the message and pair it up so that in my audience's view, they see me showing the plant and naturally ask me where I bought it, and I can naturally just say, I got it from here.
Yeah, and how do you make sure that you're not tainting your perception of your audience and you think, oh, I'm not sure I can trust him now? How do you keep that balance?
Right. So when I talk about plants, I think people have come to see that I talk about them in my own way and in the things that I like about them. And that voice stays even if someone said, here, try this plant, right? And I think for myself, at least, my own process is I would vet out that particular plant, let's say, well before I'm paid to talk about it, right? So honestly, if there's something or product that I don't really find interesting, then I just will have to say no.
Yeah. So you make sure that what you're promoting fits in line with what you believe and your core value of what you're trying to represent.
Exactly.
Excellent. Any questions for Darryl? Yes. Okay. We have Carol down here.
Hi, Darryl, thank you for that. It's really interesting hearing a presentation from the influencer's perspective. My question is there an optimum length of time for the likes of videos, like the time-lapse videos, in your opinion, when you're posting on social media? What would that be?
That's a very good question, because what I showed you on here, let's say 30 seconds, 1 minute, is way too long for social media. When I make those videos, I cut them into 4 seconds, 8 seconds, because let's be honest, when we scroll through something, right, how fast, how much time do we give something in order to say, oh, I want to stay and watch this? Well, I mean, even Instagram themselves tells us, you got to make something happen in the first 3 seconds, right? So, I mean, time-lapse video is a different thing, but maybe what you're talking about is, if you're standing in front of the camera saying something, some people, what they do is they put their key point right up front in the first 2 seconds, and it cuts to maybe what's clearly going to be the deep dive of what that little soundbite was. So that's an effective technique to get people to oh, what did they just say? And then keep scrolling, or stay on your video.
Okay, thanks. Ivo?
Ivo Gulsen again. It's interesting to see that there's quite a lot of social media development around houseplants. You do it, there are a number of other ones that promote it. Do you see extending yourself into promoting cut flowers or balcony plants or flowering plants in the home? So I just wonder why all the focus is on the houseplants and not on the other ornamentals.
That's a really very good question. And I'm going to give you a slightly unsatisfying answer, but hopefully it'll make sense. Back to the analogy of, music industry, right? I'm standing up here pretending, let's call it, I'm playing jazz music. And that question to me sounds like, oh, do you think you'll ever branch off into classical or rock and roll, right? So what I'm going to tell you is, for me, I'm going to stick to the things that I'm interested in. I recently bought a house, so now I have an outdoor garden that I can cultivate. So I will be probably doing annuals, perennials. I don't have a balcony anymore, so I'm not going to, engage with that. But the purpose, the strength of social media is that you can probably find an influence for any niche of gardening out there. And then it's just a matter of finding them and making sure that their message aligns with how you want to promote your product and engage with them.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
Mine is not a question. Mine is going to be a comment about Darryl. And I think it's important because we do a little bit of work with Darryl, but Darryl's more of a friend of ours. And from the technical standpoint, there are many, many influencers in the plant world, and there's many, many of them that are really good, and there's a lot of them that expose plants very well in what we do and build, most importantly, a lot of attention, as was mentioned this morning, and a lot of excitement. The reason why we really respect and follow Darryl, and obviously it's in his books, is that he has been the one that we have identified as, at least for our side of the world. There's actually one sitting here also that's also in this thinking process, does what he does in this part of the world, is he's really helping the consumer to be successful. And in our world, in the indoor space, our biggest challenge has been, it's the pain point, is that if we don't make it easier for the end consumer to be successful, we will just have probably no organic growth. Right now we're in a pandemic rage and people are stuck indoors. They want plants because they were there. There's also this rage of collectibles, maybe a little bit different than stamps or coins, but it's become a collectible thing. But the reality is in his particular case, he's the one that, of all the people I ever communicate with from a technical standpoint, and my background is the technical side of indoor plants, not outdoor plants. I'm definitely not Leonardo when it comes to the outdoor side of the world. He's somebody that I can spend, like I did yesterday, driving here, almost 2 hours, getting into the really deep nitty-gritty of the technical side of it. So I'm just saying that as a recommendation to anybody here, that if you're looking to understand that part of the business or support it, I'm not selling him by any means, but he's a guy that literally is helping us on the indoor side of the plant business.
Okay, thank you. So that's a real emphasis on the need for the consumer to be successful. There could be a line that says we're quite happy for them not to be successful because it dies and then you can buy another one. However, in the longer term, that's not going to create the.
I was actually going to comment about that specific point already, because I did have this interaction with a nursery owner who very early on said, I went up to him and said, hey Larry, how's it going? And he said, Darryl, you have to stop helping people keep their plants alive forever because they'll stop buying from me because they won't have turnover, right? But then I came back and I said, yes, that could be one angle. The other angle is they are successful and they buy more plants, or they tell their friends that they are successful and they buy plants. And so it's a matter of, like, you want happy customers, not ones that are dependent on you, right?
Okay, thank you. Maybe you have one last question if there's any out there. Right over at the back there, Victor.
Thank you, Darryl. So I'm curious, why do you love plants? What drove you to do this, right? Because there's a motivation to it. You do it for passion. So what is it about these plants that you love?
Yes, the question was, what's my passion for plants? Like, why do I engage with this so much? And this was actually on a slide that I took out. But I sort of see that I don't view plants purely as just, okay, they look nice, right? That's the aesthetic part. But there's beyond that, there is the biology of the plant, like how they grow, and just to be in awe of how, as animals, we have to go and get our food, and we have to move around in order to be alive. But plants are planted, and they have to make do with anything in their environment to stay alive. And that evolutionary kind of viewpoint is just so fascinating to witness right in front of you in your living room. So that's the other aspect. And lastly is that I see a value in companionship, like how. I think Mike cut it when I said companionship. So I'll just say it again, companionship, that your plants, you know, you can connect with them in a way that's much the same as, you know, you have a dog or a cat. You cannot just simply replace the plant with the same type and say that's fine, that's the same, right? I've grown that Monstera Thai constellation for 4 years, and even if you offered me what people would be willing to pay for it, like $1,000, I wouldn't sell it because I like that plant. It's grown with me, and so that companionship is also one of the aspects that I like about plants.
Interesting answer. Yeah, it's interesting how people have a different reason why they get involved in something. You start off with an engineer's fascination about how a plant grows, which is maybe not how everyone comes to it, but it grows to become something that is a part of your life day by day. I've really enjoyed that presentation and our last 2 presentations. Please thank Darryl again. Let's have a round of applause. Thank you.